Hey guys, so it occurs to me that I'm not 100% sure I made the point I was trying to make in yesterday's video. So I guess I should talk about it a little bit more. About the difference between a show being like liberal and being woke. Now, woke writers are usually really terrible. They don't know how to write realistic characters. They write all their characters as if they engage in modern day politics. And when I talk about modern day, I'm talking about our modern day, not their modern day. They act like they're out of time. So, there were a few other episodes that I was listening to today from Star Trek. And again, I'm just watching like a bunch of clips from a channel called April 5th, 2063, which is First Contact Day in the Star Trek universe. It's the day that Zefram Cochrane first utilized the warp drive. Warp 1.1 to be exact. And it's about like, on average, like 2-minute clips. And I watched like 2-minute clips. Dear Lord, I watched 200 videos while at work today. Obviously not watching them because I'm driving, obviously, so I just listened to it. 200 videos. Like 400 minutes worth of videos. God, that's a lot. And I gotta put all of those in my playlist. I don't accidentally watch them again. Oh, dear Lord. Oh, that's a lot of clicking I have to do. But there was an interesting episode that came up. And it's a Next Generation episode, a TNG episode. And I don't know exactly how it happens, but Picard ends up like in the past, and then he pulls people into the future, and like he gets trapped on a planet, and it's I always forget what the character's name is, but it's the character played by Whoopi Goldberg. You know, before she went crazy. Although, slight aside, she's always been a little bit crazy because she took the Jewish name, because apparently Jewish names get you more work in Hollywood. And, like, she didn't actually marry a Jewish guy, as far as I'm aware. She just changed her name to Goldberg. Which is a little bit weird to me. It feels like it's, like, legitimately racist. And, like, liberals in general are just, like, super racist. I gotta remind people about this often, but never forget that liberals think that black people are too stupid to get into college, so they have to give them a position in, like, high-level, like, East Coast colleges, even if they don't have the grades to meet the standards. They have to literally lower the standards for minorities to get them into those colleges because they think that they're too stupid to get a higher education. I went to community college, man, and I got a 99 on my ASVAB. I'm like one of the most intelligent people in the country according to the United States military. At least 99 percentile for people stupid enough to join the military, which includes all the officers. There's nothing wrong with going to a community college. You don't need to go to Yale. Seriously. If you want to get a higher education and you don't think that you have like the attention span, you don't have the technical knowledge, your high school failed you, they didn't teach you the proper stuff, there's no shame to going to a community college for a few years. The fact that like liberals think that they have to give positions in the college to people who didn't do well on their ACT and SAT shows that they think that these people are not smart enough to go to a community college and improve themselves enough to get entry into Yale or Harvard without it just being handed to them on a silver platter, which is racist. And Whoopi Goldberg changing her name to a Jewish last name to get more work shows how racist Hollywood is. I'm not sure if it's racist on Whoopi's part, because she's just playing the system. But apparently having a Jewish name in Hollywood means you get more work. At least back when she changed her name. This is ridiculous. Anyways, so in the episode of The Next Generation, to get back on topic, like Captain Picard gets sent back to the past. He meets up with a version of Whoopi's character like 500 years in the past. Like her species lives for an incredibly long time. So he meets her in like the 1900s on a planet that she shouldn't be on. And then they also meet up with a historical figure named Samuel Clemens, who was like a really famous author. And obviously this whole thing violates what they call the Temporal Prime Directive. Basically, the Temporal Prime Directive is do not mess with the timeline. If you have to go to the past or someone gets sent to the future, for the love of God, do not mess with the past more than you should. Because you can destroy everything, everyone who was born after that time period. Which is reasonable. Honestly, I think that's more reasonable than the Prime Directive. To get a little bit off topic again, the Prime Directive is do not give technology to a species that hasn't discovered it on their own. Do not reveal yourself to primitive societies. Which I kind of agree with, but I feel like on some occasions that, you know, if the species is not going to go full predator, then maybe you can give them, like, a vaccination to, like, a disease that, like, if a species was having their version of the bubonic plague and, like, 2/3 of everyone infected were dying, I feel like it would be reasonable to, like, send down a cure or, like, aerosolize a cure and spread it through the atmosphere to stop that disease. Because depending on the disease, if it's like the phage, oh my god, there's so many things about Star Trek that I have to explain to people who don't know anything about Star Trek. The phage is a disease that a species in Star Trek catches, and it lasts for 2,000 years until it's eventually cured. This disease completely destroys all the organs of this species. It's called like the Vididians or something like that. And it basically drives this species that used to believe in exploration and science and art and all those wonderful, like, high-minded things into harvesting the organs of other species and grafting it into their body. And it gets to the point where it's so bad that they need so many organs that they just randomly raid ships, kill everyone on board, and harvest all their organs. It gets brutal. Voyager got really brutal. But anyways, back to Samuel Clemens, right? So, Samuel Clemens talks to the crew of the Enterprise. And he's like, you know, you people scare the hell out of me. Because you got this warship up here. You can wipe out entire cities in an instant. And, like, the crew member has to explain, it's like, we don't engage in, like, war like that. We don't bombard planets, generally. Like, we're not out here just, like, destroying random cities of enemies. Like, we consider that a war crime. And Clemens is like, yeah, that, like, I don't really know if I believe that. But like you people, you're going from planet to planet, exploring, exploiting resources. You are no different from the Spanish or the conquistadors or whatever. You're no different from the British or whatever he's like talking about. And then like they have to explain to him, it's like, no, we have the Prime Directive. Like, we're not supposed to mess with primitive cultures. Like, we don't do it in general. Like, we would be like punished and thrown in jail if we did stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, but you guys don't care about the poor. Like, you don't care about the people that are impoverished. And then they have to explain to him, like, we live in a post-scarcity society. Like, we eliminated poverty about, like, 300 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore. And they're trying to explain this to Samuel Clemens. Now, if you were to, like, say Star Trek is woke, okay, you would have to say that Samuel Clemens is acting really woke for a guy from the 1900s. Like, way more woke than, like, he would have any right to be. Or is it the 1800s? The 19th century? Yeah, the 19th century. And that would be a fair criticism. Except, the episode goes out of its way to, like, debunk all his outdated views and be like, none of that applies to the 25th century. Like, none of it. Or is it the 24th century? I forget when TNG is. I think it's the 25th century. But they're, like, they kind of make Samuel Clemens into a little bit of a joke. Because he just assumes that people in the 25th century still act like the people in the 19th century. And they keep having to explain to him, it's like, no, we don't do that anymore. No, it's not like that. No, we're not a warship, we're an explorer ship. And like, it's like going out of its way. Like if Samuel Clemens is supposed to be the woke character, which again, he's not really being woke. He's more just like criticizing people of the past that he saw as barbaric. Which, I could talk about what the Spanish did in South America all day. Like how Francisco, like when he executed the Inca Empire, the Incan Emperor, like the Spanish crown was pissed about it. Like they were not happy whatsoever. Because Francisco was not a peasant, but he wasn't nobility. And he's like, the Spanish crown looked at that and they're like, we can't have non-nobility go around executing emperors or kings. Because even if they're savage, he's still a king. So if he's willing to execute the king of the Inca Empire, then he would be willing to execute people of nobility in the Spanish Empire. And we can't have that. So Francisco was condemned by the Spanish crown for what he did in the Inca Empire. And then he happened to die on campaign. So he was never able to be punished by the Spanish crown. And it's like, Columbus got punished by the Spanish crown too. But like, people are like, oh, but his family killed 90% of like the islanders that he had met. Disease killed 90% of the islanders. Like, 90% of the islanders were dead by the time of like Columbus's grandchildren. And it wasn't the Spanish's fault for the vast majority of it. It's just that the people of the Americas had no resistance to many of the European diseases. And they were just obliterated by those diseases. But you know, it's kind of strange that now that I think about it, that the Americas didn't have similar diseases that then decimated Europe. Although Europe had a way better sanitation system than the Americas did. So they knew how to quarantine people if any diseases popped over. I think cowpox might have came. No. Cowpox did not come from America, obviously, because cows were sent to America from Europe. I'm not going to get into it. But anyways, the point that I'm trying to make here is that a lot of old Star Trek, often they would have like a dictatorship, or they would have a society that is completely corrupt, or they would have a society that engages in like espionage or against its own people, like Big Brother type of stuff, or they would have societies that engaged in mind control. Now, mind control is not a real thing. Like, they were literally erasing people's minds and making them believe that they had a completely different past than what they actually had. Like, I mean, you can, like, get someone to engage in doublethink, but it's when you know, doublethink is when you know something is wrong, but you say out loud that it isn't, and you engage, you're like, you justify it to yourself. That's doublethink. But, like, Star Trek Voyager had a society that engaged in, like, Big Brother behavior. In 1984 was basically a criticism of, like, a socialist government, a far left government. And Star Trek would go out of its way to kind of like show why these governments are bad. Like, there was like one society that was basically kind of like I was going to say like the Minority Report, but that's not what it was. It was like, if someone engaged in a crime, they wouldn't bring up any evidence besides the memories of the person who engaged in that crime. So what they would do is they would take the guy in, they wouldn't interrogate him, they wouldn't give a defense attorney, they wouldn't have a prosecution, they would just read his mind, and then if he remembered committing the crime, they would declare that person guilty and then sentence them to prison. And this was an episode of Voyager. And in this episode, Tom Paris was accused of murdering somebody on the planet while on leave. Well, they then had Tuvok engage in a mind meld, which allows him to like read the mind of people. Damn, my frickin' production quality still sucks dick. Anyways, Tuvok does a mind meld with Tom Paris, and they show what Tom Paris's memories look like. And it's strange because on the bottom of the screen and at the top of the screen, an alien language scrolls by the screen, and Tuvok sees that. The audience sees it first, and then Tuvok sees it, and then Tuvok's like, wait a minute, that's the alien language of this planet. And it's like, wait a minute, that's actually a real thing that's in Tom's memory? What the hell? Like, people just thought it was, like, the episode kind of gives you, like, the idea that Tom is just remembering these words or whatever, and they just happen to be there. As it turns out, the memories in Tom's head are fake. They were put in his head by this alien society, and they would use these false memories in court to prove that people are guilty when they weren't. And even the people themselves believed that they were guilty because these memories felt real to them. And it was like some kind of programming put into their head. And it's like, this society engages in literal thought crime. Like literal thought crime. Like people put thoughts in your head and then read those thoughts and use those thoughts to throw you in jail. Thought crime has always been like a 1984 style criticism or idea used by like socialist or communist societies. It can also be used by like fascist societies. But again, fascism is a far left-wing society, because National Socialism is named that because the funny mustache guy was inspired by socialism, and the funny Italian man based fascismo on socialism, and he started as a socialist. And both those people said that they had done what the socialists had always promised, but were too scared to actually implement. They called socialists the pencil pushers, while they succeeded where the socialists did not. But if you go on Wikipedia, it'll say that fascism is a far-right ideology. But what is an actual far-right ideology? It's not fascism. I always say that it's a monarchy or an empire, where it's like a religious society that believes that God gives them the power to do whatever the hell they want. A fascist or a socialist society usually is an atheist society. Now, while the funny mustache man always said that he believed in God, in reality he was an atheist, and so was Stalin. Both of them didn't care anything about religion. Now, the funny mustache man, well, again, I hate having to say that. It's so stupid that I have to say it like that. But he was an occultist. But he didn't believe in, like, Christianity. He didn't believe in Jesus. Jesus was a means to an end for him. Whereas a monarchy that believes in the divine right to rule, that is a far-right society. Or in other words, like the Klingon Empire. Now, the Klingon Empire claims that they killed their gods. But they have a form of ancestor worship. And they believe that if the daughter, for example, Torres from Voyager, doesn't live up to the expectations of the mother and doesn't engage in Klingon tradition, that the mother will go to hell. Because clearly she didn't instill proper morals into her children, and therefore she deserves to be punished for all eternity. Because Torres, the daughter, isn't a virtuous religious person. The Klingon Empire is the example of a far-right society. And the Star Trek universe makes it a point that while the Federation and the Klingon Empire do not agree on the way to govern, that the Federation believes that the Klingon Empire should rule by its own standards. Like that the Federation should enforce their standards onto the Klingon Empire. That the Klingon Empire should get rid of corruption, but it's okay that they have an emperor. That it's okay that, like, they can challenge the emperor to a battle to the death in order to determine who should rule the empire. That is a damning indictment of people who believe that Star Trek was always woke. Because they're basically saying that it is okay for the Klingon Empire to have basically a dictator rule the Empire and eventually they have a figurehead emperor and basically like a shogun warrior chief that actually rules the Empire, and then a small council of oligarchs who debate things and approve what I forget, it was like it's like the chief of the Klingon Empire or whatever. Very interesting thing. And again, it's basically like the Klingon Empire is basically like a cross between different like societies. Like it's like a cross between the Huns, the Mongols, and like the Japanese in the way that it runs. By the end of like the next generation, when they revive like their greatest warrior of all time, the greatest leader of all time, Karas, I think his name is, they make him the figurehead emperor or the spiritual leader of the empire. And then the previous emperor basically becomes like a shogun type person who actually rules the empire but deals with the military of the empire. And then each of the clans of like the Mongols, and to be fair, the Mongols, they basically had like each and every one of the clans mix up together into like a cohesive whole. So they would pull like one person from this clan, one person from this clan, one from this, and this, and take those 10 people from completely different clans and then put them in one squad. And then they had to get along. And they had to like learn to be a Mongol instead of like a member of their clan. So it's kind of like the Klingons are a form of like space dwarves, where like each head of each clan represents a small faction inside the Klingon Empire. And they can all come together, the chiefs of each of these clans come together, and they vote on the council, and they give approval for like their shogun type person to follow through on a decision. If like the majority of the chiefs did not agree with the ruler, they could overrule him and basically say, no, you have to do it this way. Which makes a lot of sense, in a way. That's why I say it's kind of like the Huns, I suppose, but like a little bit more complicated than that. But Star Trek basically goes out of their way to justify this empire. Whereas Star Trek Discovery says that in an alternate timeline, the Earthlings became the Terran Empire, who are ruled by an emperor who rules with absolute power. And then they claim that this empire is fascist. And it's like, that's not what an empire is, generally. Like, an empire usually involves like a senatorium with like representatives, and that they have a line of succession that's not always like through like a specific family. Like every fascist government that we had on Earth, none of them were an empire in the traditional sense of like the Roman Empire or like the Japanese Empire or like the Chinese Emperor or like Charlemagne, or like the Empire of Great Britain, for example. Like, none of like the empires on Earth were fascist. Not by the traditional definition of what fascism is. And the Japanese Empire, too, by the way, it was not technically fascist either, because they were an empire. They allied with the fascists, but the Japanese themselves were not fascist. They were a military dictatorship ruled by an emperor, but they weren't technically fascists. If the Germans had beaten the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union collapsed, then within 50 years, the Japanese and the Germans probably would have went to war with each other. Because they did not agree on a lot of stuff. And also keep in mind that Germany allied themselves with the Islamic extremists in the Middle East. Because they all hated Jews. In fact, like, the funny mustache man absolutely loved Arabs. Despite thinking that they weren't, like, part of the master race, he absolutely loved them because they agreed with him on what they thought they should do to the Jews. Which is not pretty stuff, you know. But they weren't fascist either. The Arabs in the Middle East were not fascist. So it's Star Trek Discovery goes out of their way to use that term, fascism, for a government that should not be anywhere close to a fascist society. It's like, in Star Wars, for example, they say that the Empire is a human-based empire. And that the rise of the Emperor was supposed to be like an allegory for like the funny mustache man's rise to power. But in Star Wars, while most alien species could not attain a high position of power within the Empire basically just cut loose all the alien planets. It only was an empire of like human societies. And they did not generally commit genocide on minorities or on alien species. They didn't like alien species, but they never engaged in that kind of like mass slaughter of alien societies to the point where they were trying to wipe out whole species. Because they wanted to like basically just scare them into compliance. Like they tried to do with what are the Mankari, I think it's called, the fish people that Admiral Akbar is a member of. But anyways, whenever Star Trek engaged in one of these dystopian societies, it wasn't about left or right politics. It was just like, here's a society that uses brainwashing. Here's a society that can't give every member of the species unlimited health care. This is a society that engages in hunting tactics. All they do is hunt. Here's a society that believes that they should stay isolationist because all their technology is so far advanced that everyone just looks like primitive savages. Like, none of these societies, like, usually engaged in, like, wholesale genocide. Except for the Borg. But even the Borg always said that all your culture, all your people, and all your technology will be integrated within the Borg. And it will all be remembered by the Borg. Your culture will serve us and make us more perfect. Even then, you could say that the Borg are committing genocide by absorbing entire species into their ranks. But they also save all knowledge of that species for posterity. They weren't wiping this, the culture off the map. They were integrating it within the Borg, in a way. So it's like there were no fascists, outright fascist societies within old Star Trek series. Hell, in Deep Space Nine, they have some Ferengi quote Karl Marx's workers unite, rise up and strike against your oppressors. But the Ferengi in that episode weren't socialist. They just wanted to get higher pay. They weren't the guy who led the protest eventually became the leader of the Ferengi, a hyper-capitalistic society, and he agreed with that capitalism. They go out of their way to make fun of socialism in Deep Space Nine. And yeah, they also make fun of capitalism, but it's pointed out time and time again that the Ferengi, while they cheat people out of money, that they are really useful. Incredibly useful when it comes to trade negotiations. Hell, they actually make trade deals with the Klingons. And the Klingons just want to beat people over the head with a stick. So the fact that they could pull that off is incredible. And it's they go out of their way to make this hyper-capitalistic society look both good and bad. Whereas if you watch something like Star Trek Discovery, they would make the Ferengi look like the greediest people in the world. They are absolutely worthless. They are just a detriment to all societies across the entire galaxy. They're all terrible. That's what Star Trek Discovery would do. And it's dumb. Star Trek Discovery, it's dumb. It doesn't understand Star Trek. Star Trek wasn't woke. It often was liberal, but now a lot of those liberal things are oh, you should accept other races. I have to remind people this. The Republicans, a conservative party, since their founding, were the first party to have a black senator. How long did it take for the Democrats to have their first black senator? 150 years after the Republicans had their first black senator. 150 years! 1991! Again, parties never switched. Anyone who says the parties switch, just tell them that they're stupid, because they are. The Republicans have been having black representatives for 150 years longer than the Democrats. And now the Democrats are only pretending that they were always the party of equal rights, when they're the ones who passed the Jim Crow laws. And they think black people are too stupid to get into college, high-end colleges. Again, if you happen to go to a high school that was absolutely shit, then just go to community college until you get your grades high enough that you can get into Yale. That's what community college is there for. It's to ease you into the college life, so you don't have to worry about flunking out of a high-end school. Again, I have so many problems with Democrats. They're just so racist, legitimately racist. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. That's 40 minutes. Star Trek was not woke until very recently. Anyone who tells you otherwise is out of their goddamn mind. Star Trek was criticizing all sides, and it was not relating it to modern politics the majority of the time. In fact, again, with Clemens, they outright have to tell Clemens several times, it's like, it ain't that way anymore, old man. It's like, we're a completely different society. Like, we don't engage in that primitive barbarism that you guys do. Like, we got rid of that stuff hundreds of years ago. And don't worry about it. We'll be fine. Just mocking the idea that, like, people are oppressing the poor. There is no poor. Literally. You can have whatever you want in that society. Anyways, I'm over 40 minutes. Calling it there. That's all, guys. Bye.